para accesar la traducción oprima el botón del globo. I would like to call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Trustee Christian or Trustee Reckler, can one of you do the land acknowledgement?
Yes, thank you. We recognize that we are presently on the lands of the Chochenyo, Muwekma, Karkin, Ohlone peoples and acknowledge them as the first inhabitants of the land we currently occupy.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I would like to welcome everyone to this special meeting of the Board of Education, where we are here to talk about the board governance audit conducted by Leadership Associates. The mission of the West Contra Costa Unified School District is to prepare students for post-secondary education and to be responsible, thinking, contributing members of our global society. We believe in public education as the most important function in a democratic society. We believe we must treat everyone with courtesy, dignity, and respect, provide safe and nurturing environments in which to learn, teach, work, and participate, serve our students by working as partners with our community to develop well-rounded, lifelong learners and contributing members of a global society. Take responsibility for our behavior and performance to ensure the highest possible achievement of all students, employees, and our school community. Provide equitable and essential communication and support for successful learning, teaching, working, and participating. Respect, celebrate, and welcome the diversity, uniqueness, and contributions of all members of our school community. The board member should not subordinate the education of children and youth to any partisan principle, group interest, or the member's own personal interest. This meeting will provide public comment opportunities on agenda and non-agenda items in person, through the Zoom app, and by telephone. We have changed the public comment format, which will now occur at the beginning of the meeting. Public comment will last for 1 hour and includes any agendized item. The time allotted for each speaker has also been extended to 2 minutes. If you are attending the meeting in person, you will need to submit a request to address the board form to indicate your desire to speak on an agenda item. If participating via Zoom, you will need to raise your hand by clicking on the appropriate icon in the Zoom app or by pressing *9 if accessing the meeting by phone. In order to be recognized to speak on Zoom, your hand must be raised before public comment begins. Due to the Brown Act, board members cannot discuss items that are not on the agenda and do not usually respond to items presented in public comment. Dr. Hurst, can I have the roll call, please?
Absolutely. President Phillips,
Here.
Trustee Clerk Smith Folds,
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, good evening, everyone present.
Trustee Reckler,
Good evening, present.
Trustee Gonzalez Hoy,
Good evening, present.
Trustee Christian,
Good evening, President.
Student Trustee Irene Coe,
Here, present, thank you.
Student Trustee Justin Trujillo is absent. All present for and counted for, with the exception of Student Trustee Justin Trujillo.
Thank you very much, sir. Next, we are going to go to WCC USD Public Comment. I'm assuming these two belong to you too. I'm smiling, you can't see my face. If you are in the Zoom right now, please make sure that you raise your hand because once we get into public comment, you won't be able to get into the queue. So I'm just going to give folks in the Zoom a little bit of time to raise their hands if they would like. All right, going once. Going twice. Two and a half. Trying to let you raise your hands if you want to talk. All right, three gone. Jeffrey Bean Jr. is the last person in the Zoom. We will now begin. And the first person to speak from the audience is Ms. Sheila Swift.
Hello, how are you tonight? This is my fifth time I've come to speak at the school board meeting, and I'm really, I'm happy that I have the opportunity, and I appreciate it. I came today to again ask the board to, and the superintendent, to please reconsider the vaccine mandate. I didn't have much time to prepare my words tonight, and I'm speaking from my heart. I didn't have time to prepare because I was helping to organize an event called Shoes for Freedom, where we set up shoes and letters and posters in front of the school board. There were so many parents there. I was surprised, and I think you'll be surprised too. It's not just me and two people here in this room, but there's so many people. It's a groundswell, actually, of people who really want the vaccine mandate to be reconsidered. So many people will be excluded from a regular opportunity to be educated. If the primary objective of our school district is equity, I don't know how it's equitable to exclude children that have natural immunity or whose parents have religious beliefs and personal beliefs that inform their choice not to vaccinate their children. This won't be the last time I'll be here talking to you. I really appreciate all the time and effort you put into what you do. And the responsibility is I will follow up again with emails on what I've said, and also with studies. There's a New England Journal of Medicine study that just came out about natural immunity that would be very interested. I think you'd be very interested in reviewing that. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mary Swift.
Hello, I'm Mary Swift. I'm here on behalf of my sister Sheila and my nephew Val Cole. And I want to thank you for hearing us. And I want to state that I'm opposed to the vaccine mandate. as I strongly feel that natural immunity is sufficient and possibly better, because natural immunity does not confer antibody-dependent enhancements as the vaccines might. That was A. B, in America, we're free to abstain from medical treatment that we do not consent to. C, I feel that vaccine mandates set a dangerous authoritarian precedent. And lastly, I feel that it is my body and should remain my choice. Based on my medical history and my conversations with my doctor, my medical history is private and includes conditions that may be exacerbated by the ingredients in the mRNA vaccine. I trust respectfully that you guys will do the right thing. Thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Thank you very much for your comments. We are now going to move to the Zoom where Jeffrey Bean Jr. is the last person.
Our first Zoom public speaker is Julian Barnett. You may unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make it clear that this school board represents Nazi behavior, draconian behavior, and has not even looked at options like Berkeley Unified. I just called my buddy. He works for Berkeley Unified. He's a counselor. He says that the students there have an option of testing. So we're talking about a city that is supposed to be the enlightenment of the Bay Area, and they at least give those children the option of testing. The reason why they give those children the option of testing, because that white community that sits on the hill, that those families that sit on those Berkeley hills would not play with a school board that allowed that to happen. So what I say to the community is this. And the reason why I say it to the community is because I think this school board is disrespectful of the population because it's poor and non-English speaking. So they figured they don't have to have a fight. And my suggestion to the community is this, because I'm very proud of you, community, for stepping up. Take your child out of the school. That's the best option you can do. And watch West County, especially in Pinole, especially in Hercules, and especially in El Cerrito. That's where the folks that are affluent live and can teach this school board a lesson for their lack of respect. Now, the sad part is that they put people of color in charge to do something like this to their own community. So my question to Mr. Phillips is, what is your agenda? Mr. Hurst, what is your agenda? Why do you guys want to disrespect people of color and poor people? Is it you want to be elected as county assessor, Mr. Phillips? What is it you want from this community? Can you tell us? Because we deserve better than to have black faces and brown faces disrespecting the community. And I'll leave this with you, with any one of you. Please just be aware that we will not accept it.
Our next public speaker is David Murgio. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, good evening. I've spoke a few times before too, and I am not anti-vaccine. I'm not anti-medical. I believe there are many vaccines and medication that work well and have worked for many, many years, but have been tested thoroughly. There's plenty of real scientific evidence that they work. These children you are trying to make an experiment with are going to get a vaccine that's only been out for 5-6 months. And it's not enough time to have data. I ask you to please reconsider your decisions and wait till the end of the school year, not to uproot these kids in the middle of a school year. You have A, and B students, very excelling students that are going to be leaving your school district or finding other means. I also ask that you find ways to allow them to test out GED earlier than 16 or earlier than is applicable, so they can just get out of the district and go on to college and better their lives. The no bullying, no discrimination policies, the lip service to the tribes that you sit on their land, give it back. If you really feel that way, give it back. Give back our rights. Religious liberties was one of the main functions of this country being developed, and you're stripping that from people. You're causing stress on students. Bullying is a thing when they're not vaccinated and everyone is. Of course, the student advocate is not going to get a great consensus from students who are scared to speak up and scared to take a vaccine that may harm them. Every day in the news, we are seeing more and more cases of students and adults being harmed by this vaccine and not effective anymore. And new variants coming out that these were not made for. Thank you for your time. Please reconsider. Please at least give us till July.
Our last public speaker for tonight is Jeffrey Bean Jr. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening. I am Jeffrey Bean. I teach 5th grade at Shannon Elementary in Pinole. I don't think that the comments here tonight, by the way, from the first 5 speakers are representative of the wider community. I think a lot of people are getting the vaccine, are having their children vaccinated from what I've heard. And I don't think the 5-to-1 ratio in public comments is representative, just by the way. I wanted to call tonight to talk about funding for intervention for high needs students. We've talked a lot about equity the last year and a half or so, which I think is a good conversation to have. I think one of the biggest sources of inequity in our school district is lack of funding for students who have special needs. I'm not just talking about special ed. I'm talking about students who just have struggles with reading or are struggling with math. And back when we had the budget cuts 2 years ago, our learning center at Shannon lost 2/3, 2 out of the 3 tutors in our learning center. And that funding has not been restored. I think that it would be important for equity for our schools to have reading specialists, credentialed teachers who can work with students one-on-one or in small groups to help them learn to read. People are really the driving force behind schools, and people, employees are what affects students' learning outcomes. And I encourage the district to consider ways to direct funding toward people. An extra person, another teacher, another tutor who can work with students in small groups would be great. And I'm sure all schools would benefit from that. Thank you for your time. Have a good night.
This concludes our public comment for tonight.
Thank you very much to everyone who called in. And in case anyone is curious, I'm not a candidate for county assessor. We are now going to move on to item A7, which is agenda review and adoption. Board, can I please have a motion to adopt this agenda?
I'll move the agenda as published.
I'll second.
It was moved by Reckler and seconded by Gonzalez Hoy. Board, is there any discussion that needs to happen on this? Okay, who starts the vote tonight? Okay, Mr. Gonzalez Hoy.
Trustee Smith votes. Can you confirm? I just jumped in, but I believe it was me. Is it me?
It's you. Trustee Christian was last time, and then you're this time.
Cool. Gonzalez, oh, yes.
Reckler, yes.
Smith votes yes.
Christian, yes.
Oh, yes.
And Phillips, yes. So the motion Carries, we have our agenda for this evening. So we have one item that we're dealing with on this evening, action item B1, which is board governance audit. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to the superintendent.
Evening, board. Once again, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Leadership Associates, Member Sandy Thorntonson, Juan Garza, and Jim Brown. And this evening, they will be presenting their findings and their recommendations from the governance audit. I believe they have split this up, so I will turn it over to them, whoever's going to be presenting first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Board and Superintendent Hurst. I'm Jim Brown, and I'm part of the team with Sandy and Juan Garza. We're not new to West Contra Costa. As you know, we helped with the superintendent search a while ago, and we've been helping you with a couple of workshops related to governance, superintendent evaluation, and all that. So we have a good history with working with all of you and continue to be impressed by your commitment to the high quality education for all students in the district and looking at everything through the important lens of equity. This particular opportunity to work with you is a little bit different. And it comes from a request from the board itself to ask for some help in taking a look at current governance practices and seeing what is working well and what might be done better. And we chose to term that as a governance audit. And you've been through an equity audit, which was very extensive. This is focused primarily on governance and particularly the relationships between and among the board members themselves. Tonight, you will hear us use two different terms. One is the board, which refers to the five of you. The other is the governance team, which includes the five board members and the superintendent. Our audit focused primarily on the board itself, but there were some issues that involved the governance team itself and district practices that may be contributing to some of the challenges that you've asked us to take a look at. So what we're going to do is give you a quick overview of the process that we used, and then we're going to share our findings and recommendations. You have a copy of the written report which we've submitted. And at the conclusion of that, we'll be glad to answer questions from the board regarding the findings and recommendations. And we would appreciate after that a vote to accept the report. That doesn't necessarily mean you agree with everything in it, but you've received the report and acknowledge the work has been completed. Then what we're going to do is turn to the superintendent and you to talk about the action plan. Where do we go moving forward in terms of the recommendations? We're hoping that the action plan will be specific and include one action, at least one action related to each of the recommendations, 8 recommendations that were submitted. So again, we'll do the overview of the report, answer questions, and ask for an acceptance of the report, and then turn to you for discussion about an action plan moving forward. The process that we used was not terribly complicated. We identified, based on our previous conversations with all of you, and we've had numerous ones over the course of, well, since last January, since last December, almost a year ago now, we began our first work with all of you. But we identified several questions that we thought were important to ask. And what we did is we asked each of you and the superintendent the same questions. And then we took notes, and but the questions were basically about the strength. What do you see as the strengths of the current board? Are there any issues that are preventing your board from functioning as an effective governance team? We think, based on previous observation, some of your board meetings are not as efficient and effective as they should be, and what can be done about that, if you agree. The next question was, given that it's the board's responsibility to resolve conflicts between board members and not the superintendent's, how would the board, should the board choose to resolve these conflicts? And then the last three, when a board member does not agree upon protocols that have been adopted by the board, how should the board deal with that? The last two, what can you do to make the board governance team function more effectively? And the last one, your governance handbook is out of date and really needs to be updated. We heard so many times the notion that, well, where does it say that in our bylaws, or what are the protocols? When did we agree to that? And that's the purpose of a governance handbook, to identify your key policies, bylaws, and things like that, parliamentary procedures that guide your conduct as a board and as a governance team. One of the things that struck us, all of us, after we completed conversations with you, is how honest and sincere all of you were in terms of answering the questions and wanting to address the problems that have identified. We know, and this was only reaffirmed, how committed all of you are to addressing the needs of the students with a strong equity lens, helping all the staff in the district do their best work, and while still addressing some continuing difficult financial issues. We believe the district leadership from the board and the superintendent is in good hands, that all of you want to do is right to help the governance team work more effectively. And please accept our findings and recommendations with these thoughts in mind. So we'll start with our findings, and Juan Garza will begin that with finding number one. No, Sandy, that's you. I'm sorry. Sandy, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Sorry about that. It truly has been a pleasure to serve this board, superintendent, and the community West Contra Costa. Major finding one: despite some significant accomplishments such as the reopening of schools and the transition to a new superintendent, the work of the present board is adversely impacted by conflicts between board members which spill over in a public arena, failure to follow established governance procedures, lack of understanding and adherence to board bylaws, failure to respect the different roles of the board and the superintendent, and insufficient attention to the mission critical work of the district. Examples: number one, the board seems to not agree on the role of the board chair or understand the parliamentary procedures which allow for orderly conduct of meetings. Number two, the process for developing board agendas is not understood, along with the ways in which an individual board member may have a topic placed on the agenda for discussion or action. Example number three, despite efforts to get board members to ask important questions on agenda items in advance of the meeting, this does not seem to be happening with any degree of regularity or consistency. Example number four, board agendas often appear to be too dense, with mission critical work not receiving the attention it deserves. And example number five, there is lack of agreement about an organized way for the board to conduct in-person and or virtual meetings. The two are not mutually exclusive. One.
Yes, for major finding number two, the process for gathering input from students, staff, and community lacks both clarity and consistency. At times, it appears to us that time allocated to community input at board meetings and listening tours detract from the ability of the board to discuss among itself the items which are placed on the agenda and the superintendent to do his job. Examples. Example number one, the role of the board members in gathering input from students, staff, and community is not clearly defined, and the ways in which different board members operate often creates confusion about who's doing what and sends mixed messages as to who is responsible for leading and managing the district. Example number two, there is continued disagreement about ways to respect the value of stakeholders' input at board meetings versus attending to the fiduciary and policy responsibilities of the board. Jim?
Finding number 3, that there's not a clear process in place for dealing with and resolving conflicts between and among board members or resolving disagreements at board meetings. The board also seems to lack protocols which define the roles of all board members, including that of student board members. Example, individual board members and board meetings themselves do not always model how the board expects others in the district to act. 2, the board lacks knowledge of and respect for the parliamentary procedures which should guide the conduct of board meetings. Finding number 4, Sandy?
Major finding 4, the district lacks 2 key documents to guide the work of the board and staff: strategic plan and an agreed upon process for handling staff and stakeholder concerns. 2, far too much staff time is being consumed by requests from board members for information or action on a wide variety of items. 3, the lack of a strategic plan and stakeholder engagement plan sometimes leads the board to be too reactive to particular staff, stakeholder, and individual board members' concerns.
We'll move on to recommendations. I'll begin with recommendation number 1. The first recommendation, update the governance handbook to include updated board bylaws, protocols to guide board member conduct, parliamentary procedures, and board meeting procedures. We recommend this to be done by a committee of the board with the superintendent and assistance from one of us. The full board should provide clear direction to the committee and review its results before approving the final document. The board should buy into the changes and monitor adherence to the principles, protocols, and practices contained in the governance handbook. This needs to be done as soon as possible. Thus, the handbook should be clear about the consequences for failure to follow agreed upon protocols, board bylaws, parliamentary procedures, etc. Recommendation number 2. The process for putting items on the agenda should be reviewed and updated with particular attention to the development of the strategic plan and a 12-month board agenda calendar. Board agenda should be based on the strategic plan and a 12-month agenda calendar. Both documents should be prepared by the superintendent and then reviewed by the full board and modified as needed. Individual board members may suggest items, but the full board needs to approve. The final calendar should ensure that board agendas are aligned to the strategic plan and respect the staff time and resources individual items may require. It is critical the work of the strategic plan be completed as soon as possible.
Recommendations 3, 4, and 5. 3, the agenda for board meetings should be much more reflective of the district's strategic plan, LCAP goals, and metrics. Items should be clearly designated as action, discussion, and information. Board and superintendent reports should be brief and to the point, only dealing with individual activities and not major agenda items. No meeting should go past 10:30 p.m., which would be possible with a more effective board agenda planning process and adherence to board meeting protocols. Number 4, we advise that the board have someone to serve in the role of parliamentarian who would be present at the board meetings to help guide the board and rule on parliamentary issues. An example would be, when we've seen this come up, the role of the chair. This should be a third-party person who has no alignment to any board member. This is not intended to be a permanent position, but one to help the board transition to meetings that are more aligned with parliamentary procedures. 5, the superintendent should be asked to develop a plan to be approved by the board for securing staff and public input on important district issues. Individual listening tours by board members should not be part of that plan. It's important that the full board and the superintendent be involved if listening tours are part of the public input process, and we think they should be. There are multiple other ways to secure meaningful input, such as occasional town hall meetings by the full board and superintendent. And I would add to that listening tours by the superintendent himself. Number 6.
I'll take that, Jim.
Okay,
Now that the new superintendent is on board and given the turnover in key leadership and staff positions, it is time for a management audit, which would build on the work completed by the equity audit team. This audit should focus on the district's organizational structures, including reports to the superintendent, interactions among the board, superintendent, and administrative staff, and roles and responsibilities of administrative staff. There are several groups well qualified to conduct this audit, one of which is the CCEE. 7, we believe that the board and the superintendent might benefit, as would all of us, from having an individual coach or mentor for a period of time to be determined. And 8, we strongly encourage the board to emphasize the importance of meeting as an entire group to deal with the challenging issues facing the district.
Concluding comments are, in conclusion, we see it very important that the full board need to discuss and vote on the agreed upon protocols and consequences, and that these agreements be noted in writing in the board bylaws and governance handbook. These policy agreements need to include development of board agendas, length of the agenda, number of questions each board member can ask, what will determine if board meetings will be held via Zoom or in person, and at what location if in person, that all board members will be treated equally. The role of the board president needs to be clearly delineated. Listening tours and visitations of campuses need to be addressed. Roles and responsibilities need to be clearly detailed, including emphasizing the amount of superintendent and staff time taken up by board members that adversely affects the ability to improve the system, and any other specific details that have caused division among the board. In addition, it is most important that a strategic plan be developed and used to guide the work of the board, superintendent, and the district. We also believe a close examination of how the district systems and structures are organized should be completed within the near future, especially since there are several critical leadership roles that need to be filled. That concludes the concluding comments.
so board members, at this time, we would appreciate an opportunity to answer any questions or address any comments you may have, and then we will proceed to discussion of an action plan to move forward.
Board members, we're starting with Trustee Gonzalez Hoy this evening. They have a lot of findings and recommendations, so maybe we can do a couple of rounds. That would be great, starting with 4 questions apiece.
Thank you, President Phillips, and good evening, Jim, Sandy, and Juan. Good to see you all. Thank you for being here on another late evening. Good to see you. Anyways, I have a few questions about the recommendations only. The rest, I have a clear understanding. My first question is on the first recommendation about an update on the handbook. How would you recommend the changes that are made by this committee are brought to the full board? In the recommendation, as I read it, to me, it reads as all the changes should be made, and then the whole document should be then reviewed by the board. Is that how you would suggest it, or would you suggest changes come to the board as they are done by the committee?
We think an efficient way, and efficient always is the best given the complexity, but an efficient way would be the board to have a discussion of what should be the contents of the governance handbook. That should be an initial discussion by the full board. These are the documents that we want in there, bylaws, how we get board agenda items, the content of key policies such as that affecting superintendent and board evaluation, what needs to be in the handbook. And along with that, are there any preliminary thoughts about changes needed in those particular documents? Then it should go to a smaller group to do the grunt work. And also, I think that group, if the full board hasn't done this, there are some good examples. That's one area that we could help with out there of what other districts have done without governance handbooks. And it's always good to look at a couple of those because that will inform your discussion. So start with a full board, then with a smaller group to actually put the documents together and the wording and the language, then come back to the full board as a draft and then have comments and that. So it isn't an easy process. And it does have to involve an interplay between the full board and the committee. What we don't want is the committee going off by itself and then producing something and everybody saying, well, where did that come from? Okay, the board should have that discussion first. In effect, give a charge to the committee. This is what we want you to do. And here's some thoughts about what ought to be in it. Go back to the committee and then back to the full board for discussion and eventual adoption.
Completely agree.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. That clarified it for me. Thank you, Jim. My second question is on the second recommendation. The part says members may suggest items but need full board approval. How would that work in practice? Let's say that I have an item that I would like to see on an agenda, and this is after we have already created the year calendar that you're suggesting. How would that happen in practice?
Well, Juan, do you want to take that?
I was just going to give an example of what it looked like in the district where I was working. The board had a 7-member board, and at the end of every agenda, we had future agenda items. And if a board member suggested something, typically, there was just a general agreement. Yes, it goes on there. But if there was a comment made by another board member, like, why are we doing that? We've already done that, or this is a waste of time, then it required a motion and a second, and then a vote to put it on the agenda to make sure that everybody agreed it should be on there, versus something that's just going to take up time to, for lack of a better word, appease the interest of one particular board member.
I have found that the discussion, the adoption of the 12-month calendar is really important in organizing the work of the district. And that is usually the way we've seen that done is that the superintendent comes with a draft of a calendar. And that includes, of course, all the fiduciary responsibilities of the board, what you have to do. Approve a budget, approve certain personnel action, all that. And there's a timeline for those, the interim financial report. So you'll lay that all out on the calendar for the year. And then the superintendent would suggest, here are other issues that we need to address in the course of the coming year. And there your strategic plan, of course, and your LCAP can be major guides to that, so that those documents stay in front of you and are actually a means of organizing the agenda. Okay, that is going to create a pretty substantial to-do list for the board for the year. Now, having said that, there are items that come up during the course of the year. And it always is important, and Juan outlined a process where that can happen. Something is going to come up, a board member wants to suggest something, and there's a built-in process at each board meeting. Okay, here's what's scheduled to come up at our next meeting. Are there any changes in the agenda or anything like that? And then make a decision about that. But this advanced planning here is critical, as opposed to at the last minute and all that. It helps organize it better and all that.
And it's important for the discussion to happen with the full board. And Juan's example is, I think, a really great one. So every board member has the opportunity to be able to raise an agenda item to be considered to be put on the board agenda, but it needs to be aired among all 5 board members. So that way there's a consensus or majority that says, yes, that would be worthy to place on the board agenda. Keep it in mind, the 12-month board agenda calendar and the reasonableness of what can be accomplished.
Thank you, the 3 of you, for that. So the way that I understood that is that after with the creation of the 12-month calendar, which should be hopefully all these agenda items, but if anything comes up that we forgot and someone wants to add it to an agenda, we would have at the end of the night, kind of what we have now, which is, would anyone like to see any other agenda items? And then if there are others, two others, that are like, yeah, that sounds great, then at that point it would be added to the agenda. But if there's no majority on wanting that agenda item, then it wouldn't be on the agenda. That's the recommendation that I'm hearing.
Yes, the only other part to that would be, say, for example, an item was brought up and one of the board members said, this item, I'd like to see this report on XYZ. It was not automatically going to go on the next agenda item. The superintendent, it would be determined by the superintendent whether it would be on the next one or next month or the following month, depending on what was coming up in the next couple of agenda items and where it fit in, rather than try to squeeze it in automatically. So it could be the next meeting, or it could be the second, third, or fourth meeting in the future.
But one thing you want to always do when you add, if a proposed agenda item comes up, there should be a discussion about what work is required in the district to deal with that item. So the board knows if this is going to take away from something else that was already a priority, time being finite. And that, but it's good to have that discussion about. Now, an extreme example, okay, in June of 2020, and if you had a 12-month agenda calendar there, my guess is the word COVID would not have been on that agenda. And yet, about 3 or 4 months later, when the train wreck started. So the boards have to adapt to changing circumstances, and just be cognizant of what you've already said you wanted to do and what the work adjustment might be as a result of that new item. Okay.
Thank you so much. So my two questions were pretty big. So I'll pass it back to you, President Phillips, so that others can get a chance. And the second round, I'll ask the rest of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We are going to go to Trustee Reckler.
Good evening to all at leadership. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Lucy.
For the first question is your list assembled in the order of importance and priority?
I would say the first two recommendations on the governance handbook, which conclude, and the strategic plan and agenda calendar, are two of the most important. We think the others are all important, that they complement that, but we think those two are probably, and in a way, the governance handbook will deal probably with parliamentary procedures and protocols and all that. They are not intended to be in a rank order, though. But I would say those two would be probably the most important.
Okay.
And we would hope in your action plan you would address those.
Okay, so it's governance handbook, strategic plan, and the governance calendar.
Right.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I may be jumping ahead a little bit, so stop me if we're gonna get into this later. But so let's say the first example, the board seems not to agree on the role of the board chair. Are we going to discuss that later, like how to resolve that, or is that something I should be asking you now?
I think we're going, when we talk about the action plan, after that, we'll talk about that. And in a way, parliamentary procedures may be, adherence to parliamentary procedures should inform that discussion a great deal, because it's very clear about the ruling of the chair, but how somebody can challenge a ruling of the chair. And if 3 votes are required, I think that's in your I believe that's in, but we'll pick it up there.
Okay, I can save that then. If you can elaborate a bit for high functioning boards that you've seen, can you describe some of the best practices that they use to gather input, and the difference between the board gathering input and the superintendent and staff gathering input from the various shareholders and stakeholders in the community.
What we've seen are surveys that can be used. That's one means of gathering input. Town hall meetings where the full board might, be at a school, and these are listening. Then it's not a board meeting. It's a meeting for people in the area. Maybe some, you don't have to have these weekly, maybe even monthly, but 5 or 6 a year could be good. There is an organized, at the board meetings themselves, there's always somebody, and I know that COVID in the Zoom things have all changed this, but always had somebody there if somebody had a concern to express, that there was a staff member that met with that person afterwards, walked them out of the room or something like that. So people knew that they were heard and paid attention to. Examples of districts that are pretty good at their board meetings. Sandy's district and Juan's district have always been exemplary in that regard. And for bigger districts, Long Beach Unified and Garden Grove Unified are both districts with, long-term stability in superintendents, stability in board members, and agreed upon procedures for getting public input from stakeholders. So those are some preliminary ideas. Sandy, any, or Juan?
Thinking about the extensive stakeholder input that we engaged in during the search process that included an online survey. And Jim, Juan, do you remember how many? I think it was like 5,000 or something like that respondents to the online survey. It was a very extensive input in addition to the groups that we met with via Zoom. So it's important to genuinely honor and respect stakeholder input. It's also important to keep the mission critical work of the district moving forward. And you can trip yourselves up, and especially the effort to ensure that every single child is served at the very, very high levels. When you're having these input sessions very, very, very regularly, the work needs to be able to get done. So there needs to be a reasonableness behind the engagement plan. There's not, if the focus is on stakeholder input, period, and not on ensuring that the work gets done, it's incredibly time consuming to move the ball forward, to ensure that academic achievement is improved on behalf of all students. So there has to be reasonableness and balance and time to get the work done.
One example that I can give, and I did this for 15 years. We called them school site chats, and I went to every school one time per year. We only had 24 schools, but I went there and I would open up with 1 or 2 highlights. Everybody was invited, classified, teachers, and we would ask the principal to leave. Only the principal was not allowed to stay at the meeting. And I'd give 1 or 2 highlights. And then after that, I'd say, I'm ready for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And just answer questions. Sometimes 1 board member would go with me, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 5 or 6, or all 7 would show up. I never knew which board members were going to show up. They knew the calendar, and we just held those regularly, listened to staff. The next time I went, I would highlight what they said last time, what was done, and then we'd go on to the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's an example of getting directly with the staff at the schools. There's all kinds of examples out there.
One more practice I think I should have mentioned earlier is that the use of, I'm going to call it, and I'm not sure if you have some form of this or not, so, but a community advisory committee with which the superintendent met monthly. And on that advisory committee was a parent representative and a staff representative from each school in the district, plus at-large members appointed by the superintendent. And we met monthly, and it was a good opportunity to listen to what concerns were coming forward. And as we worked together over a 9 or 10 month period, and actually several years, because some people returned the following year, good relationships were developed, and it proved to be a very valuable source of getting on the ground and listening to people and finding what's going on. So I think if you can develop these systems out there that can gather this in a meaningful way, and it's going to involve work by the superintendent and work by the board, but you're doing that all now. It's just a matter of organizing it in a good way. And if you get those practices in place, believe me that some of the contentious issues around this will start to go away.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you for that. I would also like to ask on a point where it says that there's a lack of agreement about an organized way for the board to conduct in-person and/or virtual meetings. The two are not mutually exclusive. I feel completely clueless on this, and I'm not really sure exactly what this means. Would you be able to elaborate on that?
Well, part of this is a COVID situation, and who's comfortable now meeting in person and in Zoom. And all we wanted to say is that going forward, we've learned from the Zoom meetings that in some ways we can increase community participation because it makes it easier for some people to observe the board in action. They don't have to get in a car and go somewhere, but you never want to lose the value of in-person meetings either. And there was a point in the past where we thought the debate got a little bit too much. It's one or the other. But going forward, we think that some attention to be given, as we're doing tonight, some kind of hybrid model that encourages participation from a wider group of people, but protects the health of people. The way this COVID thing is going, I honestly, we don't know when we're going to be out of it completely. And probably some people are going to continue to be uncomfortable with coming to in-person activities and something like that. So, but there were a couple of things that happened in the past that was, we should be in person or we should be in Zoom. I'm just saying it's not an either or. If you're going to do high-level discussions involving key personnel, negotiations, things like that, probably the in-person is better if there's not health issues that are jeopardized by that.
The only other thing that I'd like to add to that is that I'm working with quite a few boards here in the San Joaquin Valley, and quite a few of them raised the question of we're requiring our students to come, we're asking our students to come in person, and our teachers and our classified employees, why are we not doing that same model for our board meetings? So I'm not advocating one way or the other here, but that question has been raised quite often in some of the board meetings that some of the board and districts that I'm working with here in the San Joaquin Valley.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now.
Trustee Smith Folds.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure.
Perfect. When it talked about recommendation number 1 in the governance handbook, the committees that are going to be formed, that committee should be elected among the board members, correct? The board to discuss and take a vote?
Probably be a good practice. I think, as the board president could appoint two, and then the board, if the board doesn't agree with that, they could challenge the ruling of the chair. So whatever's comfortable with you. But the idea of this whole thing is to get buy-in from the board to this document. It's such a critical document. So however you choose to do it, keep that in mind. That we don't want people ticked off with the process before the process has even started, the hard work. So do it in a way that's comfortable with you. Electing by the board seems fine. Maybe there's just only 2 of you, 3 of you. It has to be 2 that want to
volunteers also. You could start with volunteers.
Yeah.
So would your recommendation be to start with volunteers, and then if no one volunteers, go to the way of an election? Okay.
I think that could work. I also trust the board chair to, but I think there's a little homework you do in advance of that. But I think the process, given this board, the circumstances it's in, it's better to ask for volunteers and then do an election if necessary.
Okay.
It's just important that the whole board agrees to the two people who are going to be serving on the committee.
Yep, yep.
And that the conversation is the full board, not just about who's going to be on the committee, but the full board has the conversation about what the charge will be given to the two members of the committee, and that the committee will then do the work and work with, I'm assuming it'll be Jim, and then we'll come back to the full board. So it's not the work of the subcommittee to go off and do everything on their own. It's got to be a sort of a accordion, start with the full board, go to the subcommittee, go back to the full board.
Okay, thank you for that. And then on recommendation number 2 and recommendation number 3, and I think maybe one more, we keep hearing district strategic plan, right? So we hear district strategic plan. Is that the current plan we already have? Is that the one we're developing based on the equity audit, or is that a whole different plan? What plan is the district strategic plan that we're talking about?
Well, based on my conversations and ours with the superintendent, we think it's the second of the two, an updated strategic plan.
So the one that's going to be developed out of the equity audit that we had by Dr. Hurst, I forgot the name. Illumination? That's not right.
Illuminate Ed Collective.
Illuminate Ed Collective. Okay. So when we're looking and finding 2, we're talking about that strategic plan developed by the superintendent from the equity audit, and then building off of that strategic plan, the 12-month agenda calendar. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then my next question is, when we're looking at number 8, we strongly encourage the board to emphasize the importance of meeting as a group to deal with the challenging issues facing the district. Meeting as a group, are we talking about a retreat, a special meeting, closed session? What are we talking about meeting as a group? Because if we meet as a group, that's a board meeting, right? So, and can you give me some examples of what you mean by when you say meeting as a group? Are you talking about a retreat? Are you talking about a special meeting? What would that look like?
We think that it's important for this board and any board, when you have big issues, all of you work together on it. Not one or two of you going off somewhere and working with this group or that group, but working together as a team with the superintendent to take this issue. That can be in a public meeting, it can be in a retreat, it can be wherever, whatever venue seems most appropriate. Juan or Sandy, did I get that right?
Correct, and an example of that would be like this subcommittee for the governance handbook. This is the board agreeing to these two people or this doing this particular work. So 2 of you can go off and do work, but it's under the guidance of the entire board with specific tasks.
Okay, and let me just ask one clarifying question with that. When you're talking about to deal with the challenging issues facing the district, so this is outside of the district calendar that's created, or are you talking about this is inside the district calendar? It just goes right along with the district calendar, that we put issues on a district calendar that are challenging, deal with the district, and we need to come to those conclusions as a board to set the direction for the superintendent. That, am I clear now?
You got it.
Okay, thank you so much. I believe that that's 4.
Mr. Christian?
Yes, thank you. Leadership Associates, appreciate all that you have done so far. 2 things I want to raise. Just looking at the documents, it said major findings, number 4, where it basically, number 1, it says the district lacks 2 key documents to guide the work of the board and staff. And so can you elaborate on that?
Yes, Sandy, maybe you could talk a little bit about the importance of having a strategic plan to guide the work of the district.
Sure, sure. You already have your LCAP. And Trustee Smith Folds had mentioned just a little earlier, it can be a little confusing if you're having this plan, that plan. So that there needs to be consistency. There needs to be all of these efforts need to dovetail together. But the overall strategic plan, especially given that you just had a very comprehensive equity audit completed, that needs to be something that's going to be a driver for a strategic plan. So it's going to be an updated document, but we'll keep in mind the other work that has been accomplished. LCAP is a major driver for the district, and especially given that the fact that there's required input into that process. You've already had stakeholder input into the LCAP process. So you have a variety of means to access input that you've already received through LCAP and also through the stakeholder input for that the search completed. But also there could be, other means of input with the engagement plan that comes up. The bottom line is there needs to be an overall document, the strategic plan that's going to be a driver for the work that's going to be accomplished for the superintendent. It'll help bring some congruence to the work that you are all about. Having congruency is going to be really, really important. Right now, there's a sense of lack of congruence, I guess. There's things that come up here and there, but it's hard to really ensure that you're going to be laser-like focused on student achievement for every single child if you've got all sorts of things going on here. A strategic plan is going to help you ensure that the staff can stay the course and ensure that the major goals of the district are going to be moved forward.
And just to add to that briefly, going back to board agenda items, sometimes a request for a board agenda item will come up and good question will be, well, how does this tie into our strategic plan? That can help resolve whether that item should be put on a board agenda or not. Is it tied to our strategic plan or not?
I've seen a number of board agendas that are organized around the strategic plan. I think one of the things, I know it can sound rote, but reading your mission and vision as you do, Mr. Phillips, is really important. It sets the context for the work. And I've seen agendas in a number of districts. Most strategic plans will have, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 major strategic goals. Each of those, that's an agenda item on every board meeting. Anything related to goal number 1, do that. Anything related to goal number 2. And the big danger of strategic plans is they get done and they get filed. And they aren't embedded into the actual work of the district, especially at the board level. And if you can structure your agenda around the goals in your plan, and every agenda is like that. Once in a while, you have a special meeting which focused on a particular topic. That really can accomplish some of what you want to have happen with organization of your meetings and agendas.
Okay, and the other question I'm just going to ask is, what other board that's out there is similar to ours, the way we function?
You really want us to answer that?
That might be a tough one to answer.
It is a hard one to answer because every board is different. There are boards that really work well together, stay laser focused on their goals, and that's, I've listed a few districts a little earlier tonight that are examples of that. And there are different kinds of districts. There are also boards that nobody even speaks to each other. It's hard to get a quorum at meetings, anything like that. I would characterize, and I think I'm speaking for Sandy and Juan, that West Contra is a board with unfulfilled potential. And it's the pieces are there, and we just got to get them together, get it organized. And I think there's great hope and promise if you
And I
can
think
do
it's
that.
also important to keep in mind that this board has not been together as a full board very long, and you've had COVID. So, you know, it takes time and commitment that you invest in each other and in your continual development individually as trustees and collectively as the governance team.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Trustee Coe?
Yeah, so my first question would be, why weren't student trustees included in the set of interviews?
The student trustees were not included because of the personal nature of some of the conversations.
So in the future, will student trustees ever be considered to be interviewed without the personal questions at all?
That's up to the board.
And then my last question would just be, in cabinet leadership, will they also have an audit report for them, or will they ever be interviewed possibly in the future?
We recommended, one of the recommendations was a management audit focused on the district's organizational structures, particularly around the cabinet and direct reports to the superintendent. Relations between the board and the superintendent. The answer to the question is assuming that that recommendation is acted upon, that would happen.
Okay, all right, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you very much.
And if I might add, when we first met all of you, when we first started working with West Contra Costa, one of the things that really struck us was the real value that was placed on student voice. School districts talk about that all the time, but we saw it. We saw it, and that the student trustee was involved in the actual selection process. The superintendent was something that we have never seen before. So just wanted to share that with you so that you know that we work with school boards and school districts up and down the state. And it's something that is a beautiful thing here in West Contra Costa, that student voice is valued at a very high level. Things can always improve, no matter at what level you're at, you can always get better.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions, and I'm going to be a little vulnerable tonight and take this as an opportunity for feedback and personal growth. So, starting with finding one, and then you have example one. The board seems not to agree on the role of the board chair or understand the parliamentary procedures which allow for an orderly conduct of meetings. And I specifically want to ask, I know that this audit wasn't about me, but in reviewing kind of my role and what I have been doing in your work, did you find that I personally have a misunderstanding of the role of the chair?
We talked about this a lot, Mr. Phillips, and I don't think there is agreement. Our concern was that there does not appear to be agreement among board members as to the role of the chair. And sometimes actions are perceived as arbitrary and not based in that's not what our bylaws say, but then people can't cite a particular bylaw or something like that. It's the confusion around that role on the part of your work to bring the board together and deal with a lot of tough issues has been very important. But sometimes actions are perceived as arbitrary or capricious and not based on what our protocols are. And that ought not to be an issue at all for any board, what the role of the chair is. That ought to be clear. Everybody understands it. And if there's a ruling made or something like that, there is a parliamentary procedure to challenge the ruling of the chair. You don't have to go back and forth to get angry. There's a simple process that you follow. And that's one of the things that led to our thought about some kind of a parliamentary person that can help you get on track here. I think once you can do that, it's going to be fine.
It also was apparent to us that this board is very, very new. Very, very new. So understanding the role of the chair, because you will not be the chair forever and ever and ever. You know, other board members are going to step into that role. Everyone's going to need to, whoever is in that position needs to know that the board chair cannot rule unilaterally, that the board chair does have some authority and does have some responsibility, but the entire board has to be taken into consideration. You know, unilateral decisions are not okay. But it is, again, we can't emphasize strongly enough, a very new board. So there's the fact that you asked us to do this as a board, the fact that you are wanting to do whatever it's going to take to improve the functioning, so that way this board can raise a level of its effectiveness, is something that gives us all great hope. So it's important that the board chair, whoever is in that position, knows that they cannot rule unilaterally, that the group, it has to be a majority of the board that agrees to move forward on whatever decision is going to be made.
And just so I'm clear, when you talk about rule unilaterally, you're talking about like policies and what are you, is that what you're talking about? Like the chair can't decide the policy for the district by his or herself?
That's right. It's got to be the majority of the board.
Well, and on a more, I mean, and this is based on something that happened. There was a bit of a brouhaha over how many questions a board member could ask. And there was a ruling of the chair on that. There was some, that got contentious, but there is a procedure to deal with that if the board does not agree with the ruling of the chair, and keep it orderly and just challenge the rule of the chair. If there are 3 people that agree to that, then the rule of the chair doesn't stand.
And the other thing that's important to keep in mind is in whatever decisions are going to be made going forward, that the board is always looking to demonstrate what civil discourse really means.
Good point.
And what a democratic representative group does when they're functioning at a very high level. It's absolutely expected that people are going to disagree with one another from time to time. That's healthy.
Very healthy.
But civil discourse is absolutely critical. Professionalism is absolutely critical. And the fact that everybody's opinion is listened to and respected, and that it's important that there's no backdoor deals being made, that there's discussion among the board. And there's going to be some times that the board chair, whoever the board chair is, happens to be Trustee Phillips now, but it's going to be somebody else at some point in time. What the board chair doesn't hold their term as a life term. So whoever's in that position, they have to really respect the whole group and understand that it is a representative group. But there are times that the board chair is going to have some responsibilities, and it's okay to disagree. How it's done, how that disagreement is expressed, is really important for the health of the entire district.
Thank you. I'm going to go on to major finding 3. And again, I'm trying to take this as an opportunity for some personal growth and feedback from myself as well. So finding 3, example 2 says the board lacks knowledge of and respect of the parliamentary procedures which should guide the conduct of board meetings. And my question to you is, in your review of my work on the board, did you find that I exhibit, and I literally mean me personally, exhibit a lack of knowledge and respect for parliamentary procedures?
We would not, and I know this might sound a little evasive, okay? But this is a board issue and every board member shares responsibility. I don't know, but our sense is there's never been an in-depth discussion among all of you about what are your parliamentary procedures, how do they work, and how should they guide our behavior. Now, to the extent the board chair has a responsibility for initiating that conversation, then some of it probably falls on you. But that may have occurred, we're just not aware of it. Nobody told us that. And in fact, there was some confusion at some point about which parliamentary procedures we follow. So I think in terms of the role of the chair, reminding people that we have a set of procedures that we follow to do our planning and conduct of our meetings, and we're going to respect those procedures. And if there's a question, let's deal with it.
One of our recommendations is to have a parliamentarian. And our strong belief is that for a period of time, not indefinitely, it would be advantageous to the board to have a third-party person not aligned to any board member who would be there not to engage in policy discussion. That is not the role of the parliamentarian, but just to ensure that once the board agrees upon protocols, that the board is abiding by those protocols. As the board engages in its business, if somebody forgets, steps out of their role, is not in alignment with the board protocols that have been agreed upon, the parliamentarian in a very neutral manner just points out of order. So that way the board can regroup and get back on track. It's just a matter of ensuring that there's orderliness and things are moving in the way that they need to be moved. The board agendas are far too dense. There's all these sorts of things that are going to help this board function at a much higher level, to have agendas that are reasonable in length, that have the most important topics on those agendas for discussion, that everybody agrees to those agenda items. There's several, all of these recommendations are going to help to improve the effectiveness of the board and the governance team. And finally, it'll result in what you all have expressed such strong and deeply held beliefs in, that you want to do everything you possibly can as a team to ensure that practices and programs and structures and systems are improved to benefit every single child in the entire district. That is only going to happen if the system is running at a higher functioning level, and that'll happen starting off with a more effective governance team.
We would fully acknowledge that having a parliamentary, a third person, is not usual practice. So it's a short term to try to get things on track. If there was somebody on the board that the board had confidence in that could fulfill that role, that's an option, but it doesn't appear to us to be that way right now. You know, and I can think of a couple of boards in the past that, and this is a kind of a hard one, but really good boards I work with, there was always at least one board member, and I'm going to use the term, served as the conscience of the board. And if things got out of line, or somebody said, and it can happen also. This person had a high degree of credibility with his or her colleagues, and he would just say, wait a minute, let's pause. This is not the way that we try to, remember, we're modeling how we want our teachers to act, our people to treat each other. This is not what we do, and in a very soft way. But right now, we haven't seen that on your board. So hence an outside person to kind of help write the course for a while. And it might only be 3 or 4 meetings.
The other thing that we think is important to mention is we understand that there are grant funds that are specifically intended to be used for governance work. So we mentioned also that we believe strongly it would be extremely helpful to have every board member and the superintendent have a coach and to have a parliamentarian. All of those things can be paid for through the grant funding that's specifically intended to be used for governance work.
I had a coach for 14 of my 15 years as a superintendent and use them every single year. That's tremendous value. Someone you can talk to, someone will listen, someone will point you in the right direction. Sometimes just say, hey, think about this, or did you think about that?
It's a wise investment.
Very, very.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions. So we're going to start over.
Thank you. So I have 3 questions left. Next one is on recommendation number 3. More specifically, the reports. Right now, as you've probably seen in our board meetings, we have a very lengthy superintendent report, which really has become our main item on our agendas because of COVID. But we'll be looking, if we were to adopt this recommendation, how would you suggest then that we deal with the COVID updates? Do they become discussion items?
That would be one way. That's an important ongoing issue. It ought to be called out as a separate item on the agenda. If you're going to act on something related to COVID, it's an action item. If you're going to talk about it, it's a discussion item. But the reports should be, in our judgment, should be much narrower, and that's board and superintendent reports. Sometimes we've seen where, an item that should have been called out on the agenda as a specific item gets covered in the superintendent report, but it's not always listed as an item. So we would recommend the reports be much briefer, be focused on activities that have been going on, and that the items that warrant discussion or action be pulled out as separate items.
I've seen quite a few boards also on their agenda items have a, for lack of a better term, a time limit. For this item, we suggest taking 10 minutes. For this item, 15 minutes. Sometimes the discussion could go a little longer. However, some guiding point as to time constraints, because time is very valuable and you have a lot of important work to do. And you have, and good discussions about a particular item will usually lead to good decisions. But they need to be very focused, and people need to be reminded that there's just so much time in a board meeting to be able to get through the entire agenda. So that's important. That's something that you ought to consider at the beginning also.
Yeah, another point with regard to the timing of board meetings, we've strongly suggested that you shoot for completion by 10:30. It's not always going to be exact. And the reason for that is not at all arbitrary. You have hugely important responsibilities. You're not going to be at your optimum decision-making level just from sheer exhaustion. You're going to 11:30, 12, or whatever, crazy time it might be. It's number one, not respectful of your community or staff to keep people up at who knows what all times of the late evening. And it's not the optimum time for you to really have all of your wits about you to make serious decisions. You know, it's just staff members have to be up early and back on those campuses. You know, parents who are engaged in the meetings, they've got work. It's just with more effective planning of board agendas, and also with more adherence to board protocols, and there's all these things that can create a more reasonable time frame for important work, the mission critical work of the district to be done.
Thank you. Next question is on recommendation number 4. Who would you recommend that we hire as a parliamentarian? Would we utilize one of our district lawyers, or would you suggest that we contract with a consulting firm? Like what do other boards do in this situation?
Well, as I said, most boards would have somebody either in the superintendent's office or on the board that would be able to do this. It may be that there's some, I would guess that within your community are probably several people that are pretty good at this stuff. And there may be even somebody who would volunteer to help you out during this time. So certainly your attorney could help, but you know, the price tag with that is a little bit higher. And I suspect there probably are, in fact, in talking to you individually, one or two of you had some thoughts about that there are some people in the community that could do that. So that might be a first step, just to see
You could
what's out
also
there.
consider contacting the County Office of Education. Sometimes they're very helpful.
Right.
It's just important that the person be neutral, not somebody who's aligned to any particular board member or two or more.
That makes sense. Thank you. My last question is on recommendation 5. So how do you balance the need for us to get information from the community around an item that we're going to see the following Wednesday, right? And allowing the district to bring us the feedback from the community. Does that make sense? So I reach out to the community quite often to get information, how to vote on something, right? And sometimes the turnaround has to be pretty quick. The district can't always send a survey on a Monday and get it back on Wednesday, right? So how do you balance the need for a listening tour or for feedback from the community and the boards not doing it themselves?
Oh, you used an important, you know, the board. And, you know, one of our concerns about, you know, the way it's been operating is it's too individual. And in different people, and I understand that different people have different contexts and all that, but if there can be a formalized way for the board to get the information it needs from the community. Now, having a structured agenda, knowing when big items are going to come up, there should not have to be a lot of this last, where did this come from and how should I, you know, what are your best thoughts on it? There's a little bit too much of that seeming to happen. And we think if you can get your agendas more structured, the 12-month agenda calendar, that can help with a lot of this. It is important that we do this, that we listen and everything. And but if you structure this a little bit differently, and the board provides more opportunity for, you know, maybe through a town hall meeting, I think something like a community advisory committee. And I remember our board members always came to that meeting, and they just kind of sat in the back and listened to the dialogue from the different schools and everything. That was a big help. So I think there's some systems you can put in place that would minimize the need to do what you're talking about. Sandy or Juan, do you?
I would agree with that, Jim. It's the structured agenda calendar is going to help tremendously. And, you know, the other thing too is it is absolutely essential to honor and genuinely respect stakeholder input. But you are a representative board. You were elected to represent your constituents. That doesn't mean that you have to tap into them weekly or tap into them, they voted for you. And it's important to know that you don't have to tap into them for every single decision. At the same time, you also want to ensure that you're in touch with the needs of the community, so that there is a fine balance. It's just important to not have it be consuming so much of your time and the staff time that you don't have the time to get the actual work done. And
Thank you
actually,
so
I
much.
should say it's important for the staff to be able to get the work done, because there's the board works at the policy level and the staff works at the implementation level.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you, Sandy. That was my
No.
last question.
Thank you very much.
Trustee Reckler?
Is there a timeline to complete all of this that you guys had in mind?
Yes. The answer is yes. And we think.
In our lifetimes? Is that-
Well, the strategic, I don't know what the framework is for the strategic plan. We know there's a firm that's been contracted to do that, and that's moving forward. The 12-month agenda calendar should probably follow that, but there isn't anything that prevents you from developing a calendar between now and the end of the year also. So we think that most of the items in this should be done within a 3-month period.
And especially the agreement on the protocols and the consequences, and that be agreed upon and put into writing.
Governance handbook, as mentioned earlier, is a major priority.
Okay, thank you. Next question was, in a previous conversation, there was a recommendation that Reckler Smith Folds works on the governance handbook, but I don't see it here. Is there a reason that was eliminated?
Yes, we thought it'd be better for the board to make that decision about who's supposed to do that. We didn't want to prejudge that.
Okay, and then finally, if you could talk a bit more about the management audit. How long does that take? What's involved? When should it happen? And approximate costs, if you know. And is it something that the board decides, or is it something that the superintendent decides?
It could be done either way in terms of the board or the superintendent. I've gone through 2 of these, and they were both at my request as superintendent, because I wanted some outside advice on organizing the reporting structure in the district. It seemed inefficient to me, and I called, in this case, was at that time, the State Department sent a team down to help with that. The CCEE can do this kind of work, and also FCMAT can. I mean, I'm looking for ways that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg, and the CCE has funding to do this. I think FCMAT does. And the scope was intended to be primarily focused, as I mentioned earlier, in response to Irene's question, on the district office organizational structure, the number of assistant soups, associates, the titles, the reporting structure, how many people is the superintendent evaluating directly, and those kind of issues around district administrative. How are we managing this district at the district level? And I know the equity audit talked about the work of some of the couple of the departments, business and HR, particularly in terms of the work that's being done, how well it relates to the equity missions of the district. But this is a more narrowly focused. If you use one of those organizations, it should be something that could be done within a 3-month period, if not faster. I think it's just And it should be something that superintendent's comfortable with. He should be directly involved in talking to the people. And basically, I need some help in taking an independent person to take a look at how we're organized. What would your recommendations would be? Something like that.
I would add that your superintendent is your CEO of the entire organization. So the recommendations I would suggest would come from your superintendent, that you work together as a governance team. So you're having conversations on a regular basis as a governance team. And as individual trustees, you're certainly going to have conversations with your superintendent. But recommendations, I think, should come from the superintendent.
Yes.
And then the board discusses. It's much easier if you have one person as the point guard, and that would be your superintendent.
Right.
And could that happen now? Or would you wait until the equity analysis is complete?
What would you think, Chris?
I think once the equity audit is complete.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything else.
Thank you.
Trustee.
Thank you. I have a couple. When we're talking about number 6, and now that the new superintendent is on board and given the turnover in key leadership and staff positions, and it goes on to talk about the management audit. And then it says this audit should focus on the district's organization structures, including reports to the superintendent, interactions among the board, superintendent administrative staff, and the roles and responsibility of the administrative staff. Would those turn around and then be, once those findings come through through the audit, does that turn around and impact or affect what we put in the governance handbook, or what would be put in the governance handbook? And I'm talking specifically about when it says interactions among the board, right? So would we then have a policy or part of the governance handbook that says the superintendent interacts with the board by fill in the blank, or the board is informed about something that happens when fill in the blank? Like, is my question clear or not?
Yeah, yes, and I think the roles and responsibilities of the board and superintendent in that area is part of the governance handbook. How those communications occur, agendas are built, and all that is part of it. And that's part of the district admin organizational structure to make sure that work happens. The board gets the information it needs and in a timely way so that it can make the important policy decisions it has to.
Okay, and then my second question is, there was conversation about what happens if policies and procedures or protocols are not followed at the board level. And there was mention of there would be consequences. Can you give me some examples of what those consequences would look like? And consequence may not have been the word used, but the reaction if something is not agreed upon, policy is not followed. What would be an example?
An example would be, you mean how it would be handled, or an example of the behavior?
Oh, not an example of the behavior, but an example of policy was set, rule was established, rule or policy got broken. What's the next step? So it's that, hey, we talked about this and now you're not doing it, and it's just a verbal? Is it, hey, you're censured? Is it, hey, this happens? How does that look, that next step? And is that next step outlined in our governance handbook? I'm assuming that's a yes, but what's an example of what that next step would look like?
I think it's a caution from probably the board president, unless the board president is I mentioned earlier, somebody on the board is the conscience of the board, and that's something the board could decide. But if there's something that happens that's contrary to the protocol, the first thing is a caution, hey, we don't do that, or that's not consistent with it. If the behavior continues, and then that's a different thing. Then it starts to escalate. Maybe there's something in writing that occurs. You know, you want to, you know, we don't think you have a situation that's even approaching that censure, you know, stage and anything like that. But there are boards, Trustee Smith Folds, where there's somebody that is just, they're so totally out of line. And they're denigrating to staff. They're, you know, that's a particular offense that we see in some boards we work with, is ones after another, the staff is denigrating. That's, you know, we don't treat people that way in public meetings. We don't want students treated that way in a classroom. So if that would be an example of something we see a little bit more often, if somebody starts to chew on a staff member or something like that. I've had to intervene as superintendent a couple of times, and I've turned to the trustee and I said, you know, if you have a question for that person, please direct it to me. I'll respond. And I wanted to get the staff person out of the line of fire. And then I could talk to the board. I wasn't reluctant to have a conversation with a board member, but usually the board president did that.
In our district, we on a few occasions, there was some issues that needed to be addressed regarding the particular behavior of a board member. We had a 7-member board, so 2 board members were selected through discussion between the board president and myself, or the clerk of the board if it was the president, and they would have a separate meeting, invite them to coffee and have a conversation about their behavior or their actions. In your particular case, you only had 5 board members, so it could be 1 board member having a conversation with that particular board member one-on-one to try to, you know, just get them to understand the inappropriateness of whatever is taking place.
There was one incident long ago, or early in my superintendency, that was pretty. It rose to the level that created a real high degree of concern for me. So I asked for a recess and asked the 2 board members who were of concern to meet me in the closed session room. And I just asked everybody to just bring the level of rancor down, and just reminded them, with all due respect, this is not how we agreed to conduct ourselves as a governance team. And it's detrimental to the entire organization to have that kind of really bombastic language being used in open session or at all. So it just required a little break, a little timeout, to just take a deep breath and say, we need to be better than this. And it never happened again. It never happened again. And it was something that, you know, nobody was censured, but we had to call out. And there were a couple of other times that board members had to be reminded that there were certain things that we had agreed upon as an entire governance team, that we had lengthy conversation about it. We all agreed upon it. And even if not every single person was really gung-ho about it, the majority of the board agreed on it, and everybody else said, okay, I'm a member of this team, and that's how democracy runs. So that's how it ran. But over time, it just got better and better and better, because in the beginning, we were all very, very new. We were trying to find our way. And as we became more experienced and more sophisticated in what it really means to be a high functioning governance team, it got so much better, and it had a wonderful, wonderful result on student achievement, you know, which is the #1 priority, kids' well-being and their achievement.
Thank you for that.
That idea about a recess is really important. What she said, when the temperature starts to rise, it's okay just to, let's have a recess and just kind of ratchet things down a little bit. That's a very effective strategy.
Thank you for that. My third question would be, you said there's always a better way, or every board can do better engaging its student trustees. Would you suggest that when talking about the governance handbook, and if there is a part for student trustees, right? Like if you're talking about student trustees, if we're talking about, even in the bylaws, if you're talking about student trustees, if you're talking about the interaction, if you're talking about all of the things that go with our student trustees, would you suggest, or how would you suggest making sure that that input is there? Is that an invitation? We're talking about student trustees now, and the way that student trustees are sitting at the board, interacting with the board, making sure that you're getting everything that you need. Would that be a way to invite student trustees in to make sure that we are doing what you said, which is doing the best version of making sure that we're including student voice in everything that we do?
A section in the handbook about the role of student representatives would be very important to have. And you've had, your current student board reps. You could ask them, what do you see as your role? What are the challenges? Any suggestion? You've had several in the past. It might be good to send them a letter and say, anything you could share with us about this, what you learned from that experience, something we could have done better. But the big confusion is that the five of you are elected board members, and you have fiduciary responsibilities under the law. Students are not elected board members. They don't have to answer to a constituency, run for election. They're not held liable or responsible for actions or anything. There's a big difference. But getting their voice in the right way on important items, things like that, is really critical to the role. And you might want to, I'm not sure how your student reps are selected or rotate or anything like that, but you should talk about this in the handbook and how you work effectively with your student reps.
Okay, and so, all right, especially because they are elected. So we have a student kind of all council, I'm naming it wrong, but they are elected from that kind of all council.
But that's a different election.
Right.
They don't stand, that's not a ballot, from the community. They don't have the responsibilities you do.
Right. I agree with that. But I also agree that they do have a high level of accountability, especially our student trustees, because they do it really, really well. They have a high level of accountability to their peers and bringing that voice to the board. So it's one of those things that, yes, Mr. Brown, you are 100% right. Yes, and right. So it's a both and. So they do. And if we're modeling, it's modeling by inclusion. Right, it's modeling by showing this is what we need to do. So I'm going off a little bit off the question. The last thing is, can you guys tell me what you know about the listening tours? Because I just want to make sure that there's a clear understanding, and listening tours I'm putting in quotes, about the listening tours. What did you know? What have you found out? Have you attended a listening tour? What is your understanding of a listening tour?
Sandy, you want to take that, or do you want me to?
I'll share my thoughts. What my understanding is that one or two, less than a majority of the board, is conducting listening tours very, very frequently. The idea of seeking input from stakeholders is absolutely essential. How it's done, that's why one of our recommendations is that as the board, you work with your superintendent and actually we suggest that the superintendent come up with a suggestion, a recommendation, and then you guys all discuss it. Because the engagement plan needs to include the superintendent. Either the superintendent does it or the superintendent and board members together do it, but not individual board members alone, and not on such a frequent basis. And then what's the result of that? What's done with that information? The superintendent needs to be a part of that. And I have not had any conversations with Dr. Hurst about listening tours. I just, as a former superintendent myself of more than 14 years, I would have found it very, very, very difficult for me to be able to provide leadership if I was not involved in those listening tours. I was very involved in high-level visibility across our district, and felt like I was aware of what our people, including our kids and our classified staff and our certificated staff and the parents and all the people that we served in the entire community. But I would have found it very, very difficult from my effort to help ensure that the system was continually improving if there were these random listening tours that were happening that was not in conjunction. That's why we also stressed the importance of a strategic plan. Things need to be more orderly and more organized and more focused with really a purpose behind. So that way there's mission critical work that is going to ensure that every student is getting better and better and better services over time. So it's something that just needs to be done in a more organized way and not in sort of a haphazard way. And maybe I've got it wrong on what's actually happening out there. So, I certainly do not want to share that I think that I know exactly what's going on. I'm just giving you my 2 cents.
Hey, I think there's a tendency sometimes for these to result in to-do list for the superintendent. And more tasks end up on his desk. And again, just getting the information flow organized from constituents in a meaningful way where everybody's involved, everybody's hearing the same thing, they're setting priorities together. And much of the work now in the district, this is my take, seems to be dictated by who's heard what from whom on what day. And there's a better way to run the system if that's what's happening.
So I thank you for that. Thank you for letting me know your understanding of what the listening tour is. When it comes down to this discussion and board comments, I would like to comment on what's happening and see if that gives you a little bit more insight or enlightenment to what actually happens at a listening tour. Thank you. Those are my 4 questions.
Yeah, but you see what we're saying is that, we're recommending that the plan be developed and how we can best secure information from our key stakeholders in the district and we agree to that as a board rather than having it done by individuals on an isolated basis.
Yes, sir. I completely understand what you're saying. I just want to make sure that you understand exactly what's happening, like what's actually happening at a listening tour. So if that gives you a different perspective about your recommendation, great. If it doesn't, great. But I just want to make sure that the information is accurately portrayed to you. Those are my 4 questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Christian.
Yeah, thank you. Hearing everything that's being said so far, my question is this, going back to the governance book, will we receive the training, the things that we need to enhance ourselves?
Well, we would hope so. I think that's a decision you have to make. Wherever you need help.
Combined with the coach, I think would be ideal because I think the coach could deal with each of you individually, understand your perspective a little more clearly, and be able to assist and support in understanding how to implement and how the governance handbook impacts the work that you do and how you do your work. So it's a combination of a couple of different things, Mr. Christian, not just the handbook in isolation.
Okay, and then my other question is, when we are going to, when would this be implemented?
Remember the old song, Please, Mr. Postman? You remember that song? Please deliver the letter, the sooner the better. Okay. So that would be our response to that.
Yeah. As you make decisions about the next steps, kind of put a timeline to them so that you can move on them rather quickly. The sooner you get to them, the more effective your work will be.
Okay, yeah, because I just, want to see us, run effectively and do the job and making sure we take care of responsibility.
And we can provide you with resources, with protocols, with draft protocols for you to look at. And it needs to be your own, but we can give you all sorts of examples. So that way you can use that to get the work moving.
And believe it or not, tonight is the first major step and the most important step. And looking at the findings, looking at the recommendations, having your clarifying questions that you're going through, this is one of the biggest parts of it.
All right, thank you.
And it's also a part of the first step in creating a more unified team.
Mm-hmm.
Trustee Co.
So I only have one more question, just regarding the questions again. Will the interview ever incorporate questions about the basic understanding of the roles and responsibilities for student trustees ever? Or is that still up to the board?
In what work are you talking about?
So just like, will they ever be questioned or just have any like interview questions about how student trustees should work in the board? Like, what can we do? What can we not do? Just more development on that in the bylaws, especially. Is there going to be any sort of like possibility of doing that in the future?
I think that part of the action plan moving forward, which we're going to talk about, would address that. I think we mentioned earlier that there's some content in the governance handbook that it certainly addresses the question you just posed, and we would hope your voice would be heard in that.
And I think I heard you say, Jim, a little bit ago, that it would be advantageous to tap into some of the previous student trustees as well. So that way you have kind of some history of your peers who have served in that capacity, because it is really helpful to be able to hear specifically what the thoughts are from the student trustees. Absolutely.
And then would students in our district also have a say or just have like the ability to suggest what student trustees could do for as representatives? Like, will students in general who might not have the position, but are affected, like, will they ever have a say or possibly be able to voice their opinions on what we should be able to do?
I think that I think one of the most important responsibilities, and I don't know if this is clear or not for student board members, is to do exactly what you just said, is tap into the voices of their fellow students and set up processes to make that happen. And sometimes I've seen that that's a little weak part. If the student trustees don't understand maybe their responsibility to gather information from their fellow students and how that can be best done. And I think the district can help in that regard. But I think frankly, I think that's an area where you all take the lead and figure out ways to do that.
All right, thank you. That is all my questions.
Thanks, Irene.
Board members, we've gone around twice. Does anybody have any final questions? I'm looking down the row. Mr. Christian? Folks online, Co? Ms. Folds?
I do have a question, Mr. Phillips. Would you like me to go now, President Phillips? Okay. My question is, when we talk about the 12-month board calendar, are you talking about going from December to December? Because in December, we elect new board leadership, or are you talking about going from August to July or to June?
July 1st to June 30.
July 1st to June 30. Okay, thank you.
That's the school year, that's the budget year. And it should be aligned to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Superintendent Hurst, I think that exhausts the questions from the board.
Okay. So,
Thank you very much, sir. That's all we have to present. Is there a board discussion?
Let me just ask a clarifying question really quickly for context. This is on for an action item. What is it? Do you want a motion to approve all of these recommendations? Do you want, I heard something about receiving a report, which is different from approving the recommendations. What, Dr. Hurst, what is it that you want us to do?
Legal Leadership Associates was asking for the board to approve, move forward and accept the recommendations.
and then develop an action plan.
Okay, so board, I am asking for a motion. I'm going to use the word adopt because I think that's what I'm hearing. I'm asking for a motion to adopt the recommendation and to, I'm going to ask one more clarifying question. This action plan, I would like to put a time on it. Is there a time that you guys are suggesting that the action plan is brought back to the board for approval?
We were hoping that tonight you could at least on each of the, if you adopt the recommendations, then we would assume that follows up with some designation of assignments on who's going to do what to get this moving forward. And we were hoping that there was at least one action on each recommendation. So it would be to adopt the recommendations and then to identify the specific actions the board is ready to move forward on. We think you could do that tonight, if you want.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to structure the motion, right? So I'm trying to ask the board for a motion. So my motion that I'm asking for is to adopt the recommendations.
One quick suggestion would be that maybe we can ask Dr. Hurst if he has a timeline that he would suggest, because he would ultimately have to bring us the recommendations for implementation, right? So maybe Dr. Hurst has a thought on that timeline, and then we can go with, if we all agree, we can go with that timeline.
Dr. Hurst?
Absolutely. So the last scheduled board meeting, I presented a timeline to the board at that time, and I was talking about the strategic planning process. We have actually started having these conversations with our team now that we're back from the break. And then I shared with you those conversations around the process will continue end of November through December. And we're starting the mission, vision, core values, and the statement, anti-racism statement. That's all part of the strategic planning process, which also includes finalizing the equity audit, looking at the goals, getting closure on the goals. That takes us from January to February. If you also remember, I talked about what that would look like with area 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and doing 3 rounds, maybe more for each. Again, that takes us from January to February to the beginning of March. That also includes conversations about our graduate profile. That includes community conversations, and then also the scorecard, which incorporates also our goals and bringing that back to the board also. So all that will take us to March. So if you look at the strategic planning process, what I share with the board, we'll be finished with the strategic plan, which is a collaborative community process by March timeframe. And if we're doing the 12-month calendar right after that, that will be at the end of March for the 12-month calendar. So I would say strategic plan, beginning of March, 12-month calendar toward the end of the March.
I would add to that the governance handbook should start yesterday.
How can I make a suggestion? And Trustee Reckler.
Hi, I'd just like to make a clarification, and maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I'd like to clarify the difference between adopting and accepting. I think that we should be accepting this and then adopting a plan that's based on this. And maybe that's a little micro, but I think there are some differences in those two words.
I mean, there are differences. And so, thank you. In accepting it, we're not really doing anything, right? So this is how I see it. So like, for example, when we get an audit report from the financial auditors, right? We accept the report. We don't really do anything. It's basically like we're receiving it. There are particular things on here that require some kind of action other than us just receiving it, which is why I'm suggesting or using the language adopt. But if folks are not comfortable with that, that's fine. But I just think there is a difference. Mr. Gonzalez-Hoy.
One suggestion would be that we accept the audit and then maybe we move forward with the the governance committee. It sounds like there's already even volunteers. And then the rest, maybe we can ask the superintendent to bring us a suggestion in January with action items on the rest of the recommendations. That would be one suggestion. But if there are others, definitely open. And just for the record, I wasn't hitting Mr. Phillips. He had a spider and I was trying to take it off of him.
So kind of
Yeah. See, that's just what we were talking about, that kind of conduct requirement. Slapping your other board members around. Not good, Demetrio.
helping each other out.
I think what we need is a motion.
Yes, so is there a motion to accept the audit and to accept the audit? We'll start there.
I'll make a motion to accept the audit.
Is there a second?
Second.
Board, is there any discussion? Okay, we'll start in the same order.
Thank you. First, I just want to thank Jim, Sandy, and Juan for your work with us. I spent quite a few hours with Sandy myself, so I know all of you put in quite a bit of work with us, so I just want to appreciate that. And I want to appreciate all my colleagues for being open to us to becoming better together, because I agree, I think that we can always do some growing. I appreciate all the recommendations. I, of course, want it to be done correctly, which is why, I really, a lot of this work is going to fall on the superintendent. So he already has quite a bit. So I want to make sure and be conscious of his schedule. I would definitely love to see a few more retreats in the spring so that we can get to know each other a little bit more and understand a little bit more of where we're coming from and discuss this work deeper. And then, I heard from Trustee Reckler that she's open to being in the committee. I heard maybe Trustee Smith-Foltz was open to being in the committee. I am totally open with anyone serving on that and not being me. So I want to say, if it's you two, thanks for volunteering. And last thing, I had one more thing, I apologize. I really like this idea of structuring a calendar. I think that it would really benefit us in all the areas that I think that for me are where we're lacking. So I really wanted to appreciate that and the parliamentarian idea to get us back on track. So yes, I'm open to all these recommendations. Just want to say thanks to everybody being open.
So I guess the next part of this for me is, how does this get done and by who? So just looking at this list, let's just take, the role of the board chair. We've been over it twice, I believe, in governance sessions. I feel very comfortable myself in the role of the chair. I've read the bylaws. So would everybody go through that training? Who could opt into that training? What resources could they use to get trained? Is it CSBA? Is there a book? Is there, like, how can we, what's the part of that action plan? So that's one thing I'm thinking about. Another thing that I'm thinking about is so coming back to the governance handbook, where I do have to express some frustration around that. I mean, I could have started this on January 1st of this year and, waited for the new superintendent to come on board, waited for an equity analysis where we got maybe a 2-minute slide. I don't know if there's more in the written report, but it feels to me, and I own some of that, but maybe I waited for something that I thought was going to happen instead of just marching into it and moving it forward, at least agendizing it for a discussion or whatever. So, I'm not going to wait anymore. And I feel that time was lost, and I feel, unfortunately, that I kind of was waiting for stuff, which is not my normal way of doing stuff. So, I feel kind of bad about that. Some other things is, like for a parliamentarian, so who would do this? There's a California State Association of Parliamentarians. There's a National Association of Parliamentarians. There's an American Institute of Parliamentarians. There's lots of parliamentarians. Who owns that to make the calls, find out what they're about, to come and step in? Is there training on Rosenberg's Rules of Order, that's out there that people can attend those sessions? So where I'm really going is, who owns the action plan? And how does that get done? So that's just a big to-do question, and you can answer it now, or if we're just in discussion, that's it.
I think the superintendent has a major role to play in this, and particularly like securing the parliamentarian. There is I'm back to you, Mr. Phillips. I believe there is a motion made by Demetrio, and I'm not sure that got a second, and then the discussion. So I'm just trying to follow the normal chain on this. There was a motion to accept the report.
But
Trustee Christian seconded it.
He second. So the discussion part is on that motion to accept the governance audit. Is that?
That's correct.
That's what we are supposed
Okay.
to be discussing right now.
Okay. And then the second part is the action plan to move forward. I just want to be sure I have the
Okay, so
sequence.
this, we just want to talk about the action plan, and then there'll be another motion to put together a list, or?
How to proceed with, there would be a motion on the action plan,
Okay,
to deal with the motion on accepting the recommendations as one motion. The second would be to adopt a motion, have a motion to identify an action plan, which would include the following.
And I, Trustee Gonzalez Hoy had suggested that Superintendent Hurst come back with a draft plan. So that way, the items that Trustee Reckler mentioned can be considered, so that way it's actionable. These recommendations need to be put into an actionable form. So that way the board can discuss that next level, the next step, because there's some things that need to move quickly, like the governance handbook that's going to have the protocols in there.
Okay, thank you.
So for my discussion item, I agree with Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy. I agree that we accept this, we accept the findings, right? I also think that we should, like Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy said, we should move the item about working on the governance handbook. So that can be done immediately. And then we come back and we have more in-depth conversation about these other recommendations. I don't suggest taking the recommendations tonight in totality. I suggest that we accept this, that we got it, we saw it, we talked about it, and then our superintendent is going to come back with more how it fits directly with our district and what we're doing. But I do agree that we need to move on the governance handbook. So with that, I will be voting yes for Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy's motion, with that understanding that I'm accepting this because we saw it. I'm accepting that we've seen it. And I would like us to move now, also the superintendent to be able to move with the strategic plan, because that's a calendar. He already has a timeline for that. So for him to be able to move with the strategic plan, and for the board to be able to move for the subcommittee of the governance handbook. Those are the two things that I would like to, the friendly amendment, Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy, that's what I would like to add, is the superintendent also moving. That's it.
I feel like we've done motions before, and I feel like we're starting to act like we haven't. And I don't know if it's because we've been talked about in some ways, but we do know a little bit about what we're doing. So just my recommendation would be that we do the motion that you made about accepting, and then when we're done with that, the governance handbook, I'll just ask if there are some people who want to volunteer, and then we'll appoint those people to an ad hoc committee to update the governance handbook, okay? So the next person talking, I think, is Trustee Smith Folds. Were you done? You're done.
I think that what I was going to add was that friendly amendment about it. Do we have to include the superintendent moving forward with the strategic plan, or is that already assumed because he was already doing that? So if that's already assumed because he's doing that, then there's no need for my friendly amendment. I will accept the motion as it's stated by Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy.
Thank you. And yes, he's moving forward with that, the rest of the equity audit and strategic plan. That doesn't change. Trustee Smith Folds. Trustee, I'm looking at you and I'm saying Trustee Smith Folds. Trustee Christian.
Yes, I'm good. Only thing I gotta say is just push forward, move forward, so we can, take care of business.
Okay, thank you, sir. Trustee Coe.
Yeah, I would do the same, just vote yes as well to move it forward.
Okay, thank you. So I don't have any comments on this part. So board, we're gonna vote, and the motion is to accept the board governance audit.
Gonzalez-Hoy, yes.
Reckler, yes.
Sorry, my mouse was not connected. Trustee Smith Folds, yes.
Christian, yes.
Oh, yes.
Phillips, yes. Okay, so that motion carries. Now I'm just gonna ask board, are there any board members that would like to volunteer to serve on an ad hoc committee? And I just want to say what ad hoc means. It means it's temporary for something specific. So it means that it is specifically to update the governance handbook. And then when that work is done, it goes away. That's what it automatically, you don't have to vote for it to go away. That's what an ad hoc committee is. So are there any volunteers to serve on the ad hoc committee to update the governance handbook?
Do you want us just to scream out, or are you gonna go around?
We'll just go in order, and then people can say whether they want to do it. Mr. Gonzalez White.
I would love to volunteer my colleagues. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Trustee Reckler.
If nobody else wants to do it, I would do it.
Okay. Smith Folds.
I'll do it if somebody else wants to do it. I want to do it. So I would love to do it. Thank you.
And I will echo the same thing because I'm in the learning process, so it's going to enhance me more. So,
So you're saying you want to do it?
yeah.
Okay. So we have, so we have 2 or 3 people who want to do it.
That's fine. Christian and Smith Folds can do it.
Okay. So normally what we do for these committees, when we're all here, is that the board president appoints and then the board basically approves. So I am asking for approval to appoint Smith Folds and Christian to an ad hoc committee to update the governance handbook.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it was moved by Gonzalez Hoy and it was seconded by Smith Folds. Board, is there any discussion? All right. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about, well, it's a question, but I guess a comment. If how do we include student trustees in that process? I actually don't really know the rule behind that. I know Rosenberg's rules pretty well, but I'm not sure how that functions. And I would love to have their voice included in, especially when discussing the student trustees. So how would that happen? Are they allowed to have 3? Are the student trustees not counted in that?
That would not be a violation of the Brown Act.
Oh, okay. Then could I make an amendment to my motion and say trustee Christian and Smith Folds and student trustees when necessary? I don't know who seconded my motion, but
I did.
Can we just ask them to invite the student trustees to, because it's a board committee, can we just ask them to invite the student trustees in their work to come and sit with them? And
that's a great suggestion. Trustee Smith Folds and trustee Christian, if you wouldn't mind inviting them, that would be my ask, if that's okay. Thank you. Good suggestion, President Folds.
okay, thank you. Is there any more discussion? Okay, so seeing none, board, let's vote.
Gonzalez, oh yes.
Reckler, yes.
Smith Folds, yes.
Christian, yes.
Oh, yes.
Phillips, yes. So that motion carries as well. Dr. Hirsch, we have done 2 different things. We have accepted the audit. We have now installed a ad hoc committee to update the governance handbook. Is there any other action that you want us, or that leadership wants us, I see a hand going up for Mr. Brown, to take tonight?
I have no other action unless Mr. Brown has something.
Yeah, within the recommendation was that the superintendent develop a plan for securing stakeholder input. There was not a timeline to that or anything, but we think that if you accepted the recommendations, our assumption would be that's on his plate and at a time to be determined. The discussion about the parliamentarian, that Trustee Reckler had some suggestions. Maybe she and the superintendent could work together on that to come back with a recommendation for the board. I don't think these require action. It's just so that some responsibility is out there for following up on some of these recommendations. And I don't know, Juan or Sandy, are there any others that you would pick out at this point.
Maybe the discussion of a coach for every board member, given that we understand that there's grant funding to be able to fund that. That may be something that that the board doesn't have to. This doesn't mean that everybody's going to be assigned a coach tomorrow, but that particular recommendation is discussed and voted on, so that way action can be taken, steps can be discussed.
Okay, so, I mean, I did ask earlier if the board wanted to adopt these recommendations tonight, and they were pretty clear that they did not want to do that, that they wanted to bring them back. So, you know, I don't know what to say about that. They were pretty clear, I think. So, and then Dr. Hurst also talked about the strategic plan and how he's moving along. So I get it. You're saying that you don't want the rest of it to be lost. I totally understand what you're saying. So board, I think that we, based on what I'm hearing from you all, have done our work for this evening. I want to thank you all at leadership for your work that you've spent, not just on this process, but really starting with this board in the superintendent process. You have been very helpful and you have been very thoughtful. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of everyone for that work. And we do really appreciate you. And I don't think that this work will be lost. I don't. So, and I hope that it is not.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Could I make?
Yes, sir.
Could I make a quick request to Irene? Irene, this is only because a long time ago in a galaxy far away, I used to have almost the same color hair that you do, and I love it. But I would like to brainstorm some ideas about student rep role sometime with you, and Dr. Hurst has my contact information, so maybe that'd be fun to chat about that a little bit sometime.
Thank you. I'll also, sorry, Mr. Phillips, for cutting you off. I'll also be able to attach the other student trustee, Trujillo, to make sure that if that's okay with you, that
Sure.
we could also discuss. But thank you.
Sure, sure.
And we'd like to just express again to you our sincerest commitment to you and our deepest gratitude for the commitment that you have all demonstrated to really work hard to get better and better at being a highly effective governance team because of all these children entrusted to you that you care deeply about. We appreciate being a part of this.
And Chris, maybe you and I could connect tomorrow or the next day and just discuss next steps and all that. Thanks. Thank you, everybody, from us.
Thank you.
Thank you again to all three of you for your work. Board, we're going to go next to item C, which is comments from the Board of Education and future agenda items. We are at 9:04. This probably shouldn't be a meeting that goes until 10:30. If you can take 5 minutes apiece to make your comments, that would be fantastic. I am going to, this is much easier, and I should have done this already. It's just pulled up the.
May we be excused?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm so sorry for not seeing that.
Okay, thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good
Appreciate
night.
the work.
Okay, so 5 minutes. I just pulled up the timer. Mr. Gonzalez Hoy, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'll try to make it short so we can get out early. I just want to thank everybody for tonight's discussion. I do think it's a step in the right direction. I want to thank Trustee Christian and Trustee Smith-Folds for stepping up to do the adjunct committee. I know it's not going to be easy, so I just want to say thank you. And Trustee Reckler, you seem also excited for it. So I want to thank you as well. And if you have ideas, please, I would hope that our colleagues will welcome them as well, because you've had obviously more serious thoughts about it. And yes, I thought it was a very fruitful conversation. I did want to bring up two things. Well, one, I want to thank Dr. Hurst. I've been able to visit a lot of schools in the last couple of weeks with him and some of my colleagues. And it has been really eye-opening. He's been at Valley View a lot lately, and he's been doing a lot of work there. So I want to say thank you. We also visited Bayview, and I do want to say that I think him, Trustee Smith-Foltz, and I left very concerned. I got really emotional while we were there because it was rough to be there from someone who worked there not too long ago, 5, 6 years ago, and seeing what the school is now. They have really hardworking staff, a really hardworking principal and vice principal, and the school needs a lot of help. So I do think that it needs to be a priority school for us. 5 years ago, the school was at 640 students. They are now at 367. That to me is I just couldn't even believe it. There was graffiti on the walls. There were all these issues. Facilities got on it right away. Dr. Hurst got on it right away, sent me kind of like a timeline of actions that they're taking. But that school is vast majority free and reduced lunch, students of color, and it just made me incredibly sad that it is not just our lowest performing school now, but that it lacks so many supports. And I got really emotional. Just, they've had 100% turnover of staff, 100% in 5 years. That to me is unheard of. I've never heard of a school that's had 100% of staff turnover. That has become the lowest performing school in less than 10 years, and has lost half of its enrollment. So to me, that's why I got emotional, because I felt like it was not on my radar. I actually apologized to the principal because I felt like we have not done our work to support that school. So I just wanted to put it at the front of our work because it was very impactful to be there, and really put things in perspective to me about the conversations that we're having up here, right? And all the time that we spent, but we've gone how many months into the school year and I had no idea, right? So I just want to say thank you to Dr. Hurst because he's right away on it. He's been working day and night, but it was really hard for me to see that. I just wanted you all to know, the 3 of you who weren't there, 4 of you, sorry, Trustee Co, that it was hard, and I just wanted you guys to kind of know my experience of being there. But apart from that, I just want to thank you all for tonight, and I look forward to CSBA with all of you and continue to learn this week. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy. Trustee Reckler, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I don't have much. Welcome back, everybody. And we'll be off to CSBA for the rest of the week, and looking forward to that. And that's about it. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
So, Trustee Phillips, are you ready? So I want to say thank you to everyone. I also want to say there are only 14 school days left in the school year 2021. 14. So we have 14 school days left until we are going to be in the school year 2022. So I want to say that because there's a lot to do and we have not put our foot off the gas yet. And I don't think we're letting our foot off the gas anytime soon. So it's one of those things that when we have these breaks, take these breaks. Make sure that you're doing self-care. That's for all our teachers, our staff, our admin, our parents, our students. Make sure that self-care is a number 1 priority in your life. I had the pleasure of going to a school today. I subbed a couple of classes and I broke up a fight. They took me out. It was rough. It was a lot. My knee hurt, had to come home and soak my whole body in a bathtub. But I have to say what I did for just a couple of hours our teachers and our staff do every single day and have been doing it every single day for 180 days just this year and then all of last year. If you don't know that experience, and it took me a while, I had to dust off the cobwebs when I went back into the classroom. You know, little kids were asking me questions, I had to remember Quiet Coyote. It was a lot. It was a lot, but it was also a humbling experience because there's nothing like keeping your feet to the ground and being able to really understand the work of our teachers, the work of our students, the work of our staff, the work of our administrators, the work of our yard supervisors, the work of our CSSs and CSOs. So I would implore all of my colleagues, I know all of you get to the school sites. I would encourage you to continue to get to the school sites because it keeps us humble in the work. Of course, we all coordinate with the superintendent on those sites, but it keeps us humbled in the work. So I want to thank you. Thank you to the students that reminded me that I'm still able to teach about subjects and verbs, which I did fantastically. The future agenda items that I would have to know, or I would like to put on the agenda, Dr. Hurst, it's the same list, but I just want to go over it for continuity. The adult school, the trade school opportunities, period poverty, standing reports, student standing reports, dress code, numerical literacy and overall literacy gaps and strategies, the equity statement and that enforcement, public comment, revision of the bylaws and governance handbook. I can take that one off. We have done that. I am very excited to take that off the future agenda items because we have a subcommittee. Thank you, Trustee Christian. Preschool and TKAs, transition program inclusion, the virtual school, remote working, report cards are coming up again. I still want to make sure that we are giving teachers the time and the space and the grace to be able to grade those and having a clear conversation about what a narrative report card is. Vaccine implementation, mental and emotional health of all of our students and educators, making sure that just an update that we have all of the drinking water and the refillable stations and students are being able to use that and staff is being able to use that. The senior programs, we come up with the funding for the rest of the year, but we need to talk about permanent funding. I think that is part of what we need to discuss. The site standard safety at all schools, doorbells, cameras, training, etc. The teacher and administration burnout, period subbing, traffic, and working with the city on our sites, the 7-Eleven committee, CBOC applications, survey to parents about the intentions in January, and the clear safety policies around fundraising, which we talked about last time. Once again, I want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to the students. Thank you to the little girl that took me out in the fight and let me know that I have to do a little bit more exercise. That's it. I'm working out now. I'm going to start lifting weights. I appreciate everyone. Please have a great night. Be safe. And remember, 14 days left, and then we're into a new year. So take care of yourself and take care of the teachers, the students, the admin, and everyone that touches our students. That's it.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Christian, whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I just want to say to staff, classified and certificated staff, you know, everybody has been working hard and diligently. And I just want to congratulate everybody on their hard work up to this point here. And so we still have a lot to do. I just want to say, you know, right before the break, Thanksgiving, I did some visits, site visits. I went to Lincoln Elementary and was able to participate in what they had, what is a turkey trot over at Lincoln Elementary. It was kind of funny, you know, seeing them out there, everybody, all staff, kids, everybody's out there having a good time. And so, so I'll definitely be going back to Lincoln, doing visits, and then also King Elementary. I went to King and checked on King, and they're doing much better. They have a program over there. I believe it's the Peacekeepers that are working diligently with the kids over there to bring resolutions to conflicts and so forth. But yes, we just have a lot to do. And I just wanted to say, you know, to everybody, you know, keep up the good work and so forth. And also, I just wanted to say this, we need to start highlighting, our activities, what goes on at our school sites. All of our school sites have different activities, our high schools and so forth. And we just need to start highlighting the different functions so the community will know what's going on and how to be able to participate in these activities. So, that's it. And everybody have a good evening.
Thank you, sir. Trustee Cole.
Yeah, so I'll try my best to keep it short as well, just to respect everyone's time. But I am very happy that we did have this audit report. I'm definitely, when I asked some of my question, I was left a little confused, or not necessarily confused, but maybe more disappointed, just because, I believe that student trustees should, have more of a say, or if not, more of a, I guess, responsibility and like what the bylaws should be for them. I know that when they were discussing, they said something along the lines of, student trustees should know, their responsibilities very clearly, and we should be able to like understand our roles and responsibilities. But I know that when I came in and Trustee Trujillo, we both were kind of blindsided. We didn't really know much about responsibilities, and we were left always asking questions of whether or not we could do something or say something. So I would ask that in the future, because I know that I think my term will end soon, that the future trustees or student trustees will be able to understand their roles more clearly. And then as for, I hear that Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy, Christian, I'm sure everyone else is also visiting school sites. I know that Trustee Trujillo and I have also requested to be able to at least visit some school sites with the superintendent or just with other trustees. I know that, we would also have to organize that, but I would just like to be able to visit school sites and see, how conditions are like at certain schools, right? Because when Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy mentioned, the elementary school that he visited, I know that some of my friends went to that school. And so I think it would be interesting for me to at least visit some schools, and Trustee Trujillo would also like to do that. And yeah, that would just be something that I would like to be able to do. I'm not sure if that would be possible. But yeah, that is just one thing that I thought was interesting, and I would love to be able to visit. But yeah, that's all I'd like to say. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's my turn. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that things have not always been pretty. And this is real life though, so things are not always going to be pretty. But I think that sometimes the fact that it's not always pretty sometimes takes away from the amount of work this board has actually done over the last year. This is my 5th year on the board, and we've probably had 2 years worth of meetings literally within 1 year. And then those meetings were not just meetings for meeting's sake. Pretty much every time we get together, because of the times that we're in and the state of things, not just in the world, but in our district as well, we are constantly and repeatedly taking on heavy topics and working through them. So even though things are not always pretty as we would like them to be, and even though that sometimes I think has the unintended consequence of distracting people and people not necessarily being able to focus on what's really happening, I just want to talk very briefly about some of the things that have happened during this year, because regardless of the narrative that all that happens on this board is that people fight and disagree and don't get any work done, I don't really think that that is true. There are disagreements, and sometimes, again, they have not been pretty at all, but a lot of work has happened. So here's a list of some things that have happened this year. One, we actually have a positive budget certification, which we did not have. That happened this year. We had a series of study sessions where literally experts from across the country participated in informing our community about COVID. And quite frankly, I think those study sessions were some of the most informative study sessions around the entire Bay Area, if not the most informative ones. We worked directly with the county to secure COVID-19 vaccine for school district staff. We rallied together and partially reopened our schools in the spring, despite going almost a year without really doing a lot of planning to actually do that. It was a Herculean task, but it happened. We passed really comprehensive charter school reform as far as our policies are concerned in this district. We had summer school in this district, and it was really creative because I really looked at it like it was really the first summer camp that a majority of our children were actually able to attend. We fully reopened our schools in the fall. And it's not just that we reopened them in the fall, but we did it safely in the spring, and we did it safely in the fall. That doesn't mean that there were not any hiccups along the way, but the fact is that we did it. In addition to that, we authorized some new programs, including arts and trades. We actually started the process to rebuild Lake Elementary School, Richmond High School, and Kennedy High School. And these are projects that folks have been waiting for literally decades, but it happened, and it's happening with this board. In addition to that, and I know some people don't like this, but we passed a set of COVID-19 mandates to actually keep our community safe. And we're actually conducting, we always talk about money issues in this district, but we're actually conducting a comprehensive system-wide audit to actually improve our delivery of services to our children and families. And you just saw one leg of that tonight. So I could keep going, but I only have 5 minutes. There has been a tremendous amount of work that has been done by this board, despite the hype and despite the disagreements. And I really don't want that to get lost because it really happened. And we now get out of time. We get out of our meetings on time, which people said couldn't happen either. So with that, I am done making my comments for this evening. And I want to announce that the next scheduled Board of Education meeting is December 8th. So with that, you all have a blessed evening. Thank you for your time and good night.